About their father, there are a variety of stories and impressions that begin to surface. In the reflections of the children, brief and concise sometimes, long and colorful at others, there are common themes that come through. They show love and respect for this man who walked through a life filled with family, faith, farming, fun, and fantasy. We're here today to pay respect, to pay tribute to our father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. I will do so by giving us all a taste of this man through the reflections given from amongst his 10 living children. And might I just say that we're so grateful that the church is providing for us a lunch meal here. And following the lunch, there will be an open mic where stories, maybe from the family or stories that you might wish to share with us, you will have an opportunity to do so. Soren Kierkegaard, the little Danish philosopher and Christian, made the following statement that I have come to treasure. Life is understood backwards, but lived forwards. You can turn around if you wish. Life is lived forwards, but understood backwards. And so I will do that a little bit through these kind of reflections of our dad. First of all, the family man. The number of living children attest to the fact that Dad was a family man. And there'll be talks about the colors of the station wagons that we drove. Of the 11 children born to Mom and Dad, 10 of us are living still. We are all here to give witness to the kind of family man Dad was and to describe the diversity of this family. Lorna shares this memory when Chantel was born. Dad and Mom came to be with us the week after coming home from the hospital, and Mom did her usual cleaning, tidying up, including the fridge. Always the fridge, even on short stays, says Lorna. While Dad had this time to relax, he was still recovering from his recent fall from the ladder while picking apples. And by the way, I hope all of you had a chance to see the pictures that went through on the display before the service. Then she reflects on what it is to be a parent. She says, somehow as we age, we grow wiser, even if our children don't think so. But Dad made a comment to me saying, it's great to have a new daughter or son, but they are a bigger responsibility than one thinks. And I guess after having 11 children, he probably should have a bit of a word of authority on that. Bernice describes how my father taught me that I could do anything I wanted to. And then she reflects on how both our parents taught her about hard work, and with that also came enjoying the fruits of that hard labor. Velma, reflecting on Dad's food preference, what a sweet tooth he had. When he would not bite on any of the 3 colors of food offered to him, if we offered him the 4th, the dessert bowl, he generally would start. We would tease him about his drinking his sugar with his tea, and he loved honey. He would buy it in a 5-gallon pail size, always had to have dessert at least twice a day, and again before going to bed. Of course, his favorite ice cream was strawberry. When going out for lunch, a person knew he most likely would order strawberry pancakes or waffles with whipped cream. And then granddaughter Chantel commented how having honey in her tea always makes her think of Grandpa, even though Grandpa did the double dip of sweetness with both honey and sugar! Exclamation mark. Karen, the youngest child, I think he believed in family. He tried to be there for us all. He would point to the picture of the family in his room at Dawnwood, even in his demented state. Dad loved ice cream. When you were home with the flu, you knew that you were getting better when you walked into your room with a bowl of ice cream. The family man and music. Stan has referred to this already, how Dad loved to sing. Marilyn's greatest tribute to our dad has been the importance he gave to music in our family, instrumental and vocal. For Marilyn, that journey was helped by the arrival of a second-hand piano when she was a mere 9 years old in that little house on the demo place. She started taking piano lessons. In the following years, Dad took the time to take her to piano lessons and to local piano festivals where she participated. And Pat adds to that as well, too, how Dad encouraged her with taking piano lessons and did this amazing thing that parents get to do and instill in her a confidence that Pat understood and knew music and she could go with it for a long way. Communication with children. We spread out all over the place. Velma described the letters and communication he so painstakingly typed with 1 or 2 fingers on the manual Underwood typewriter with some spelling errors. The typewriter had no spell checker in place. It's old technology. And some irregularities in the message lines became crooked because he'd moved the paper on the typewriter roller to make the corrections. We all remember one summer in the early 80s, just as email was coming in, we were at a cron gathering, Mom's family, in Ninette, Manitoba. At the end of the weekend, one of Bill's oldest nephews, Ernie, passed around a piece of paper asking for name, address, and email address. By the way, when you're signing the register, if you want to put some email addresses beside that too, we would be pleased as well. When the sheet was collected, Ernie noted the following, that our dad Bill had signed in, Bill Braun at Underwood.
Excellent.
He was not to be left behind. And he signaled the desire to keep up with whatever means of staying connected with his worldwide family. And we were at that time a worldwide family, we still are. That's Dad, the family man. Number 2, the fun fisherman and the volunteer and fantasy man. Just some reflections. Lois recalls how on a hot summer day after finishing the Saturday chores, going swimming with him in the dugout.
Yeah.
Mary Jane Creek. Okay. And how he loved to swim. And yes, our dad loved water. Dad, the fisherman. Dad would usually try to join Velma and George at least once a year fishing. One summer it seems that Velma must have found the sweet spot, the lucky spot. She was catching a few fish, but Dad was experiencing that skunking feeling where he's not getting any. He thought it might be the reel that Velma was using, so next week he went to probably the Canadian Tire. He went out and bought the same kind of reel. There's no recollection that he ever used that reel. Velma also wrote about Dad, the apple-picking man, and that particular stream will come through many of our reflections and the pictures. She thinks everyone on board with apple trees knew who he was. If he saw apples on the ground under the tree, he'd pick them. Plus ask if he could pick the ones that were still on the tree. The garage would be filled with boxes and boxes of apples. He would bring those to the Union Gospel Mission in Winnipeg as well as to the Red Cross. He was known as the Apple Man at the Red Cross. In the fall, after the Quaker Farms equipment had harvested the potatoes, carrots, and onions from their huge fields, Dad would pick up the vegetables that had been left, and again, he would bring bags of them to the Union Gospel Mission, and I think probably to Providence College in Otterburn as well. The fantasy man. Our father was a romantic. He was the eternal optimist who wanted to win the Reader's Digest $1 million lottery. He never told us how he was going to spend the money if he won it, but that's a separate story. While still living on their condo here in St. Anne's Road, Mom told Lois she was sick and tired of their mailbox being jammed with Reader's Digest envelopes, promising the recipient millions of dollars, and wondered how this could be stopped. Lois, dutiful that she was, sent registered letters to at least 13 American states and numerous countries as far away as China and Japan, from where some of these letters originated. Then she requested Dad to take them off the mailing list. The envelopes continued to arrive. After Mom and Dad moved to Donwood Manor in 2004, Lois said address change notices to all organizations that still were sending communication to them. That's the appropriate thing to do. You got to keep Canada Post apprised of what's going on in the family. Without telling Mom and Dad, Velma rented a post office box for a year. She convinced the postal person that our parents had Alzheimer's, signed the paperwork, so much for the Privacy Act, so that Velma could receive all other garbage mail addressed to them. Well, the Reader's Digest $1 million winning number prize envelopes continued. Frustrated at wit's end that Lois's registered letters had not slowed the incoming notices, Velma sat down and wrote at least 100 letters to countries as far away as India, Australia, New Zealand, etc., informing them that Dad had deceased. Well, this backfired. A number of months later, Dad got a phone call from Reader's Digest sending their sympathy to Dad's family on his passing. Who would think that such a huge worldwide organization such as that would ever phone to offer condolences? Dad convinced them that he was alive and well. But he was angry at what his daughter had done to him. Shortly after that, 1990, Dad was admitted to Concordia Hospital, and the mailings were discontinued. Dad, the fun and fantasy man. Dad, the farmer. This was his life. Lois says, Dad was never gender specific. If one of us girls were willing to learn to do the farm work, he was willing to teach us and to trust us with that task, whether it was building a metal granary, seeding, harvesting, baling, or working with the livestock. I didn't notice here milking cows. Stan says the following. One memory was at the times when we were kids and we were farming, and when the uncles and aunts would come out from the city for a visit in summer, that part of the ritual of the day was for Dad to insist that everyone jump into the car or the truck, possibly, as we did the tour. He took guests and us around from field to field, showing off the excitement and pride, the wonderful crops of wheat and barley and flax, and then standing in the fields, counting the number of rows in each head and predicting a good harvest on that basis. He loved the farm and how good farming was, and he was proud of showing off the fruit of his hands and the fruit of his hard labor. Now I'm just going to add a little bit to this. One of my last trips together with my dad from our home in Beamsville, Ontario, back to the Hamilton Airport, after the funeral of his oldest brother, Martin, in 2001, we were driving through the countryside on the top of the escarpment, away from the vineyards, on top of the escarpment where these large fields are. His regular comment still was, "My, what a beautiful crop of wheat. My, what a gorgeous crop of soybeans. My, that looks like a good crop of hay." And then when I tried to ask some further questions or tried to gather some more comments, there was this mumbled silence, a sad sign of the disease of dementia robbing further discussion. With this man who ate and breathed and lived farm life to the full. Karen has a reflection on him as a Charcot-Marie-Tooth syndrome carrier. For Dad was a carrier that genetically linked disease. And we ran our fingers over his hands today again as a reminder of that. Some of us children are carriers, others are not. Karen recently described one of the markers of this disease: cold hands with debilitating muscle strength in the hands. And then she says, if his hands hurt in the cold like mine do, I can't imagine how hard farm work would have been for him. And now I, as the eldest son, saddled with the responsibility of maintenance and repair of the farm equipment we owned and used, saw perhaps why it was how our father so gladly handed to us steel tools and the tasks that went with them. It may also explain why he enjoyed milking cows. What a place to warm up those cold hands and to keep the decaying muscles exercised. Father, the farmer. Dad, the man of faith. There was a place in these comments in which farmer and faith intersect. Betty. In a personal note, I was passionate about horses. Betty was. And you, Mom and Dad, challenged me by saying that if I wanted a horse, I would have to be in charge of their care. Responsibility became part of the journey of enjoying horse ownership. This responsibility was never a burden. I did not have to look far to see this in action either in your farming, Dad's farming, or in your faith practice, Dad's faith practice. Every year, Dad, you committed to putting in the crop, and the reward was the harvest. Every day, you made a personal commitment to your faith, Dad, and now, Dad, you have your reward. Let me add this reflection. There was a time in the life of our dad where faith and farming intersected for me as his son. It was Saturday, August 1, 1959, Mom and Dad's 70th anniversary. I was 14 years old. We were just moving to that final farm home place, the Fishbrook place, on a hot Saturday. Around supper time, a tornado tore through the countryside north of Manitou. Our homestead was spared, but barely. But the other farms were not as fortunate. But it started a season of rain and early snows that harvesting the wonderful crop on both farms lay folded over in tangled lengths of straw and heads of grain. The harvest was under threat, for winter came early. The clouds lifted ever so briefly later in September, and on a Sunday afternoon during one of Dad's tour of the crops, I heard him say to a friend, "This grain is fit to combine. If it stays this way, we can combine tomorrow." And there was this word of hope and look of hope in his eyes. This 14-year-old, urged him to start right away. Go home and start right away. And he said, "It is Sunday, and it is a day of rest. We will not move the combine today." We did not move the combine until the following spring. A tough time in the life of this farmer of faith. Later on, after I had become a father and more grown up, I think, I recall talking to my dad about this time in our family's life and on how our parents struggled to make ends meet. His calm reply, "The Lord provided." We have been blessed at how good we have been able to live. Dad was a student of the Scriptures. We've already talked about how the Scriptures had a central place in the Braun household. The worn King James Bible in the Braun household is a silent witness to that fact. I recall, and again remember, that our father had not finished grade 8 education. His mother tongue, German. But I recall during my early teens at Manitou that our dad came home, and he held up a brand new book that he had purchased. It was written in German by a man by the name of Erich Sauer. And that is how I can still hear him say that name. I do not remember the title of the book, but when I go to Amazon or Wikipedia, I discovered that one of this man's pivotal book was From Eternity to Eternity, and it was written in 1954. It isn't just that my dad bought this book, but he had immersed himself in this theological, doctrinal piece, and he wanted to share something of this with us, as he must have done with the men and women at church, Manitou MB Church. Dad, the churchman. Marilyn gives thanks to the fact that he was the Sunday school superintendent. As such, he got Marilyn involved at an early age in playing for the various church activities. This type of service is something that she has continued to do throughout all those years in Rome. And then she reflects, I often wonder where he found the funds in those early years to let me pursue this path of life. Stan adds the following. Dad loved to conduct VBS at the Manitoulin MB Church. How he put all that together and still farmed, I'm not sure, but he loved to do it. He willingly sacrificed himself to make it happen. And I want to conclude with Dad as the man of prayer. Last night, Stan shared some of his personal experience of hearing Dad pray at breakfast with Mom and Dad, and hearing Dad specifically pray and mentioning all of the children and the grandchildren. One January, a couple of years ago, Stan and Annette and Ruth and I happened to meet at Mom and Dad's. All 6 of us had gathered in the activity room before lunch. Stan and Annette and Ruth and I were saying our goodbyes to Mom and Dad, as one couple headed west, the other headed east. It seemed appropriate and necessary that one of us, Stan or myself, should pray. After all, we are in the profession of being ministers. We know how to do this. And Mom would have expected us to do that too. And I remember Stan and I sort of looking at each other for a signal as to who would do this benediction. And in that split second of waiting, our dad started to pray. It seemed like the cloudiness of his mind lifted, and he poured out a passionate, clear, rich prayer for each of the children, each of the family. He prayed for each of his children as best as he could name them, and included those he could not remember in this amazing prayer, aware of the fact that he couldn't remember all the names. And in this act, we rested in the childlike faith of this man, our Father, who sat in his own way. Language is convoluted and perhaps is the King James Version of the book of Romans, who sought to describe his trust and confidence in a God who has given promises and commitments to family and friends and societies and missions and the Church of Christ. Jesus said, I tell you the truth, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Dad continued to petition the God of heaven on behalf of his family, even though his memory and mind was so clouded so many times in the later years of his life. And for me, it's as if he prayed prayers again, as a child would. We can join the Apostle Paul in saying of our dad, I fought the good fight, I've finished the race, I've kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. 2 Timothy 4, 7 and 8. We love you, Dad, grandfather and great-grandfather and friend. May you rest in peace. Stan, you want to come and lead us?